Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Sharon Pratt. I am the founding director of the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, and we are happily a part of the University of the District of Columbia. Just to give you a sense of who we are, we were launched in January of this year by Mayor Bowser and President Ronald Mason, and our purpose is to engage a new generation, get them involved in public policy, but also to rediscover the history of this very unique city, and by so doing, the history, a significant slice of the history of our country, make it accessible and intriguing to contemporary folks. So, to that end, every speaker series that we have, every individual series that event that we have, we always infuse the conversation with historical data points. So we did that in all of our events, and we shall do so again tonight. Now, this is as timely a topic as you can imagine. It is, the topic is around disinformation warfare and its implications and its potential threat to our democracy. Now, this is not supposition on my part. This is something that is a part of, even, I dare not mention it, the Mueller report, but also a great many individuals, a great many institutions that are agnostic in terms of their politics, but deeply concerned about the implications for our free, reliable, transparent elections. We have an outstanding panel that will talk about that tonight. The person who's going to lead it is our Mark Thomson. But just to give you a feel for the extraordinary individuals that we have Malcolm Nance. Anytime you turn on cable television, you almost always see Malcolm Nance. He's quite a very much respected commentator in the sphere of intelligence. We have Dr. Daniel Freed, who is who's with the Atlantic. He's a very respected diplomat. And has co-authored pieces, essays in this space, so very much respected. Then we have Virginia Case, who is the CEO of all of the League of Women Voters. And the League of Women Voters has, since its inception, been focused on voter participation, of civic engagement. I told her that was the first thing I did in politics was to work for the League of Women Voters. So we're so honored that she could join us tonight. And to put it in historical perspective, we have someone who's a voting rights expert. She worked in the Clinton administration and the Bush administration and was the voting rights specialist in the Civil Rights Division. She now is the lead litigator for the Advancement Project at the University of Baltimore Law School, Professor Gilda Daniels. And our moderator is someone who is a legend in his own time. And a graduate of this university, an extraordinary political commentator, a real presence in all forms of media. Let me turn it over now to the Reverend Mark Thomson.
Thank you, Mayor Pratt. Let's give the mayor a round of applause.
I failed to introduce some of our distinguished members of the university, the Board of Trustees. I know Dr. Jarvis is here. And our good brother Shelton is here. We also have two members of our senior advisory committee. I don't want you to think that I'm stuttering. Dr. Jarvis again, and Sonia Gutierrez. So with that, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Let's give Mayor Pratt a round of applause for having the vision to bring this institute forward. And you know, those of you who have known about the university and support the university over the years, this is the type of thing that our state university which ultimately it will be, amen, our state university ought to be doing once we do become that 51st state. We're here tonight to talk about democracy and democracy in peril. I think it's also very appropriate for the mayor to convene this conversation because, let's face it, right now, part of the reason our democracy is in peril, part of the reason our democracy is under attack, is because there are more diverse people and more diverse people running for office and winning office, as a matter of fact. And our mayor is one of the people who got that started. She was the first woman elected to be mayor, black woman elected to be mayor of a major city. And we look around today, how many women are being elected to public office and how many people feel threatened by that and feel the need to do something about it. Having said that, I'm going to, and for that reason, I think there's a saying now, the future is female. Have you all heard that? So that I'm true to that and stay on course and out of trouble, I'm going to go in a different order than we had planned. I want to hear from our women on the panel rather than go right to left, left to right, because they are here, and hear from them. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of the targeting and the disinformation is targeted at women, because women do have the power today to decide elections, who the president is going to be, who state representatives and elected officials are going to be. And let's face it, these state legislatures and elections are as important as the presidency because the census is coming around. And so big decisions will be made in that regard. So we're going to hear from each panelist, and I would, they're all going to make 7-minute opening statements. I'll ask one follow-up question, and then we'll go to the floor. We won't keep you here all night. I will ask, though, because this is being filmed, and once this is filmed, we will share it throughout social media, and I ask each of you to then share, when you see it on social media, share it with others. That's the kind of positive information we need out on social media, not the disinformation, but this type of information, right? So as each panelist begins their 7 minutes, please just say your name again for the record so that those listening and watching will remember, because a lot of times people watch, well, I didn't get the name. So please repeat your name when we, as each of you goes, and we'll begin with Dr. Gilda Daniels, please.
Good evening. Good evening. I am Gilda Daniels. I am a professor.
It's on.
It's on? It is on. Okay, there we go. Okay, good evening. I am Gilda Daniels. I'm a professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law. I am a former deputy chief in the Civil Rights Division voting section at the Department of Justice during the Clinton and Bush administrations. And as you can imagine, after Bush, I had to leave, and I'm happy I'm not in this administration at this point, but I have many friends who are still there. Mayor Pratt asked me to talk about the history of voter suppression. I'm happy to do that, and I'm honored to be on this panel, on this esteemed panel. And the Right Reverend is allowing women to go first, and so thank you very much. I am the daughter and granddaughter of Baptist preachers, so yes, sir, and and a daughter of the South, so I follow instructions, particularly when they come from the Right Reverend. Amen. Amen. So let's talk about voter suppression. So I've been working in the voting rights area for more than 2 decades. I actually have a book that's coming out in January entitled Uncounted, The Crisis of Voter Suppression in the United States. That's with NYU Press. And in that book, I talk about I provide a framework for understanding voter suppression, right? And we use firsthand accounts. I use the framework of my almost 100-year-old grandmother who passed away earlier this year and to document how these laws actually impact real people. For example, my grandmother did not vote until she was 40 years old in 1965, right? So she was in her 40s when she voted for the first time. Hey, but the law says you can vote right, when you're 18 or at that time at 21. But because of Jim Crow and certainly being in Louisiana, that was not the case, right? So so we look at how we have these cycles of voter suppression, right, and how we can look back in order so that in a Sankofa type of way, right, we can look back in order that we can look forward. And when we look back, all the way back to the Founding Fathers, we see that we have this country is operated from a premise of suppression, right? So we started with the Founding Fathers and all men are created equal and everyone, and having the right to vote, but the right to vote was only for white men with property. And you didn't have to be a citizen. You could, as long as you were a white man with property, you had the right to vote. And we have this paradox, right, of democracy where we say that we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's self-evident, right, that all men are created equal. But at the same time, we said that we will only count black men as 3/5 of a person, right? So three out of 5 black men were counted, whereas 5 out of 5 white men were counted. So we started on this premise of suppression and created this system, this second-class citizenship, right? And so we have this progress where we're creating this country and everything's equal. However, we put into our documents, our founding documents, that we will treat these people as less than, and we will limit their ability for representation. So we then move to the Civil War, where we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and we have these Civil War amendments where in slavery we have equal protection under the laws, and we now have the right to vote. These black men now have the right to vote, and we enter this period of Reconstruction. So we have this period of great progress, and we enter this period of Reconstruction where we're registering to vote at astronomical numbers. Black men are being elected to state, local, and federal levels in numbers that we have yet to see again. So this was an opportunity for us as a country to actually see what democracy could be, right, where it was inclusive, right? We know that women weren't allowed to vote, right, but and there certainly were others who weren't allowed to vote, but you get a glimpse of how if you give the franchise freely and fairly, that change can be made. However, not so fast. We think free at last, not so fast, right? So we have this period of redemption, where we're in this cycle. We had great progress, now regress, where white supremacists were saying, okay, that's enough. We had federal protections. The federal protections were removed. They removed the Union soldiers, and now white supremacists were able to use violence, right, death, in order to create a barrier to the ballot box. And they used constitutional conventions to create things like poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, vouchers, and felon disenfranchisement, which is still around today, in order to take the percentage of registered voters from, in some places like Louisiana, where it was almost 90% of eligible voters, to around 5%. In a very, very short period of time. So I can imagine that my great-grandparents, who were slaves on the Oakland plantation in Louisiana, were excited when they were emancipated, but then the violence and all that surrounded it certainly pushed everyone back, and then we saw this period of regress, which took almost 100 years. It took until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to create an environment where African American voters could once again participate in the electoral process. And the Voting Rights Act was seen as, and continues to be seen as, one of the most important pieces of legislation that was ever enacted, right? And for example, in Alabama, before the Voting Rights Act, only about 19% of African Americans were registered to vote. And in less than 20 years, that number, 19% of African Americans, only about, and there were about 66% of white Americans. So you had like a 50% gap. In less than 20 years, that gap was almost closed, right? And now we're almost at parity in most states, right? So we're at parity in many of those states. So we go from the Voting Rights Act to modern day voter suppression, where we again had progress. As Mitch McConnell told us on last week, you got a black president, so you don't need reparations. So we now have, so we're good, right? Well, not so, again, free at last, not so fast, right? So we had periods where we were exposed, right? We were exposed in 2000 with Bush v. Gore, and we were exposed. Our electoral system was exposed with faulty machines and butterfly ballots, with felon disenfranchisement, removing people from the rolls who were eligible voters, and we looked. It was certainly a debacle that the entire world saw. And so that was in 2000, and then we didn't learn. We got to 2006, 2008, 2010, right, where we had this Republican sweep, and this was after the election of Barack Obama, so they said, okay, you got Barack Obama, we're going to start turning the wheels of time back. You got these restrictive voter ID laws. And now in 2016, you have proof of citizenship laws, and you have felon disenfranchisement, where you have, the founding fathers said 3/5 of a person. Felon disenfranchisement in some states says you're 1/5, right? So 1 out of 5 African American men aren't eligible to vote in places, certainly in places in the South, right? And so we're maybe calling it something different now, but it has the same effect, right? And it's the suppression is from the inside, right? So we have these measures that are certainly coming from the inside. We might have called it poll tax before. It's voter ID now. Literacy test before. Now we have voter deception. And it was intimidation then. It's voter intimidation now. And where is the help? Where is the help coming from? We have equal opportunity suppressors, right? In this last election, we had Native Americans in Bismarck, North Dakota, who were told if they didn't have a street address, they couldn't vote. They don't have street addresses. They have post office boxes, right? And so we've allowed the states to create these systems whereby people are being disenfranchised, right? And tomorrow will mark the anniversary of the Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder decision, which gutted one of the main protections that we had, particularly in the South. And we're still trying to recover and still hoping that Congress will act in a way that will restore some of the protections that we had in the past.
Thank you. Just about time. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. When Gilda said she was a granddaughter of preachers, I was worried about 7 minutes. But that was so 7-minute openings, and we'll have some follow-up. We appreciate the presentation. Virginia Case of the League of Women Voters, please.
Oh, am I on? Yes? Okay, great. So thank you. I'm so excited to be here. It's great to have these history lessons. Oh, no, it's not? Oh, I am. Okay. It's great to have these history lessons and these reminders, so I'm really glad that you did it. Thanks for putting the ladies first. The League started in 1920. We're actually 99 years old, and I think it's important to note that our organization was born out of the suffrage movement, and I think it's also important to note that we recognize that the suffrage movement, in addition to the history that you told, did not really grant voting rights for all women. And so it's important to acknowledge that because of Jim Crow laws, white women benefited from the 19th Amendment. And so I think that's an important thing to put in the room and make sure that even our organization, some of the people who were members of the suffrage movement were people who fought to make sure that white supremacy would reign in the South. And so that's something that we as an organization also are trying to reconcile with, that how do we move forward from that and acknowledge that we have some ugliness to our foundation as well. But as we move forward, what I will say is that we also have many wonderful members of our organization. For example, members like Eleanor Roosevelt, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Shirley Chisholm. So we have seen this wonderful progress throughout the year, and we have many members of Congress now who are members of the League of Women Voters, and we're extraordinarily proud of the work that we are doing. Our mission at the League is to empower voters and defend democracy. And when you think about it, there's no other time like the present to be able to say we really need to achieve that mission. We do it in a few different ways. The first is on the empowering voter side, voter registration, which we know is under attack in states like Tennessee, for example, where there's new law that's going to be enacted on October 1st that won't allow organizations like ours to be able to register voters. They'll only be able to come through their local Secretary of State, motor vehicle, state sanctions, voter registration locations. And we're fighting against that. But these types of laws are popping up all over the place. And so as we try to register voters, this becomes an impediment to our ability to do that. Second is voter education. We have a website called vote411.org, and that is our main elections hub. We have 5 million voters who came just in this past midterm to find out where their polling locations were, find out information about the candidates. The thing that's different about ours, because we are a nonpartisan organization, and I'd like to add that doesn't mean not political. We do have opinions and positions. Lots of opinions and positions. When you have a lot of women running an organization, we absolutely have lots of opinions and positions. But I will say that having 5 million voters be able to come and find out simple things like where they go to vote. Something simple, you'd be surprised how many people just don't even know where their polling location is, because polling locations, obviously, one of the voter suppression tactics that people use is moving polling locations, in some cases outside of a city. So making sure that people are aware, and also about the candidates. And so what we do that's different than most voter education sites is we actually contact every single candidate so that they can have the opportunity in their words to put the information about their platform and their positions on that site. So we're not just scrubbing the internet trying to find out information. We're actually asking candidates to hear in their own words. And then the other thing that we do once we register, educate, is get out the vote. GOTV efforts are really, really important, because we know that having a bunch of registered voters is great, but if people aren't actually getting to the polls and getting out there and casting their ballot and having their voices heard, then it means nothing. We've done it all for nothing. And then the other side, on our defending democracy side, and we do that through a few different ways, education and advocacy. You know, that going back to the education piece, especially around what we're going to be discussing this evening, you know, there's a lot of disinformation out there. There's just a lot of bad information out there. And so we consider ourselves almost the good housekeeping seal of voter information. It's really a way for people to know that we're coming here, we're giving you information that you can trust, we're not coming with bias, we're just telling you what is. It simply is what exists. With no spin on it, there you go, it's what it is. We do a lot of advocacy work on specific issues. And then we also do a considerable amount of lobbying. Like I said, nonpartisan doesn't mean not political. And we'll be talking a little bit about the For the People Act and the Honest Ads Act and things like that, which really allow us to meet with our representatives, not only at the national level, but at the state and local level, to make sure that they understand that there are solutions to some of the issues that we have. They're just responsible for acting on it. And then obviously, they don't always listen to us, unfortunately. So we have over 300,000 members and supporters around the country. We have over 750 leagues in every state and in almost every congressional district. So one of the things that's really great is when they don't listen, we can activate and we can mobilize. And our members are everyone from 16 to 106 years old. So I can tell you, we had a case in Michigan where they had the voting right experts come in on gerrymandering, and it was this little old lady. They didn't know what to do with her. The people, when they were cross-examining her, felt bad. So we find that intergenerational organizing and mobilizing our base is extraordinarily important. Everybody has a valuable contribution to make to this work. And then I mentioned litigation because we are in all 50 states and in almost every congressional district. One of the great things that we're able to do is be in litigation. So we're actually waiting this week. We have 2 cases being heard in front of the Supreme Court. One is on the census citizenship question, because we know that the census determines everything in this country. And so we wanted to make sure that we were there and we were able to have a voice to defend and protect those who are not able to put a case forward for themselves. And then around a gerrymandering case in North Carolina. And so, as we'll talk more, I'm sure, about tactics and techniques that people are using these days. It used to be voter suppression was usually a racial gerrymander. but they realized that they were getting beat in the courts. So they figured out, well, if we can't gerrymander these states on race, partisan gerrymanders. And so that's a way that they've been able to get around the courts. And this is a coordinated effort. This is not a mistake. This is definitely a coordinated effort, and coordinated with other suppression efforts. So the attack on women's reproductive rights is an example of this, where these are many of the same players who are making these decisions. And so we're fighting those battles on a day in and day out basis. And I think it's really important. And one of the things that we like to say at the League is that, you know, these are ordinary citizens. We're ordinary people who have been somehow capable of doing extraordinary things. It doesn't take an expert, no offense to the experts in the room, but it means average citizens engaging in our democracy in a way that allows us to stand up and have our voices heard. And when they won't hear us, we just get louder because there are more and more and more of us engaging. So I'm very excited to be here and happy to answer any questions that you have, because I think my 7 minutes might be up.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you. Very fine presentation. One of the tactics that we know is being used, one of the most sophisticated ones today, is disinformation. One who's written about that and spoken about that is Ambassador Daniel Freed. Please, sir, for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Before coming on, Malcolm Nance and I were talking about our having spent our youth the last days of the Cold War against the communist system in favor of democracy. And we did all right. We won. And we won because the people under the Soviet Union believed in us. And we believed in ourselves, flaws aside. We believed in our best selves and our ability to get past our worst selves. And we did okay. And it breaks my heart to see that the Russians are back. They want another round. They were in our elections in 2016, and they will be back. And the worst of it is, they play on our weaknesses. They can come in because we let them. And it's not just us, right? They're all over Europe. Whatever problems, you're in Spain, and there's an issue with Catalonia wanting to secede, the Russians are there. You're in Poland, there are some bad historical feelings with the Ukrainians. Yeah, the Russians are there, and their disinformation operations play both sides. They're angry Poles pretending to be angry Ukrainians. They play both sides, try to get both sides to react against each other. Well, of course they do it here. And they do it here. They didn't make it up. They didn't make it up. But they exploit it and they exaggerate it. They played, in the 2016 campaign, they played both sides of racial issues, white Latino issues, immigration issues. They would play both sides and they'd argue with each other. You know, pretend fights to heat up the atmosphere. We know they do this. They won't be the last. But the Russians are going to be sophisticated. Their techniques will change. And they're going to start blending in with domestic disinformation. They're going to push it along a little bit and encourage it, but they're going to feed it. The Soviets did that in the old days, but we let them in. Voter suppression? Oh, sure. You bet they're going to do that. And they're going to encourage voter suppression groups in the United States, and they're going to amplify it. What's their purpose? Mistrust, anger. They want to bring out the worst. If it's a question of fighting the Russians and Russian disinformation, there are things we can do. The more profound challenge, though, is domestic disinformation. It's Americans. And it's Americans using, you know, in the 18th century it was pamphlets, in the 19th century it was daily newspapers and the telegraph. Then it was radio, in the hands of good people, in the hands of bad people. Now it's the internet. Fake sites giving out fake information. Some of it will be the Russians, but it breaks my heart to say this too. It will be us, our fellow Americans, lying to other Americans about things like polling stations, locations, qualifications. All right, now part of my task is to come up with solutions and not just wring my hands over how lousy it is. Yeah. Okay, well, but look, I want to talk about the way you can deal with the problem. Okay, the good news is there are a lot of people in this country who understand that Russian disinformation is a problem, and that's a way to break into people's heads and start tackling the larger problem of disinformation generally. We can do that, we can do it, and we can do this in ways that are consistent with our best selves, not our worst selves, by which I mean we don't have to resort to censorship. We don't have to destroy freedom of expression. We can do this using the good techniques of exposure, transparency, integrity. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean people should be getting ready right now, and I bet dollars to rubles, the League of Women Voters is already in this space, a lot of other groups doing it, getting ready to identify and expose and publicize disinformation efforts, whether they're foreign, because some will be, whether they're domestic. And that's going to require an enormous amount of organization. You don't snap your fingers and do it at the last minute. And please, don't hire an old man like me to do it. What you want is to get these 22-year-old civil society activists who can spot a disinformation campaign. They can tell, but don't let them just shout into the wind. They have to be linked up with people who can publicize it. Okay, let me give you an example of how it really can work in the real world. All right, the Russians hacked into the campaign of the French president, liberal candidate for president, Macron. The last days of the campaign, they hacked into the computers, threw out a whole bunch of nasty emails. Okay, just like with the Democrats, right? Just like in 2016, except this time the French were ready. For one thing, the French love showing that they're smarter than the Americans, and so they got to prove that, in fact, they were. What they did was it got exposed in real time. European and American civil society activists had a huge exposure, and they laid it out. And by the way, it turned out that Russian disinformation against the French liberal candidate was being spread by some American right-wing activists. Okay, just so you know, just so you connect the dots, right? And they exposed it. And the French media, instead of reporting the stuff that was exposed about Macron, the big story was the Russians are messing around, to hell with them. Now, not quite the language, but you get the general idea. Macron won. It was a successful example of social resistance through good organization and integration between all the different players. It worked. Now, next time around will not be so easy. The Russians are not going to use the same techniques. They will use new ones. And domestic American actors will use new techniques. It'll be deep fakes, fake videos showing people saying things they never said. Or they will be better and better at mimicking official websites and fooling people, blast emails, convincing people that their voting location is someplace where it isn't, or that they have to bring a certain kind of ID, or if they have any unpaid traffic tickets, they can be arrested. They will throw out this stuff, and it has to be combated in real time, which takes organization. And it takes people on their toes working. The good news is it can be done, okay? We don't have to be manipulated. We can rise above it and have fun doing so. Because when you're pushing back, you're exposing them. The bad guys work together, okay? They do support each other. And you pull on that thread, you get a whole bunch of bad guys. And that, it's important to enjoy your work, I think. This This is going to be the work of the 2020 campaign, but it's the organization for it has to begin now, and it's got to be combine the tried and true, you know, League of Women Voters, credible, venerable organization, new organizations, they're around town in Washington, cutting edge, counter disinformation, you know, digital sleuths, digital Sherlocks who can detect this stuff. And then media, people in the media who are sophisticated enough, when this bad stuff comes out, they expose it and explain it. Bottom line is, we can do this. We got to start now.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate that. Thank you. And then, of course, as we all have seen, who's probably been one of the most foremost public voices on this issue. He's written about it, his latest book. He's got another one coming out, too. Prolific spokesperson and author on all of these matters. He and I are in constant communication. Just to show you the seriousness, I spoke to the NAACP about a month ago about the targeting of African Americans on social media. And they convened a telephone town hall for the entire membership, the national membership of the NAACP last week. And Malcolm Nance was on that call to let people know the seriousness of this and how they can prepare to confront it. So, Malcolm Nance.
Someone had better put a timer on.
I got it.
Okay, where's my little button? It's on. Is it on? Oh, there you go. Normally I never use a microphone, which is fun. Okay, well, I'm Malcolm Nance, and some of you might have seen me around somewhere. But it's almost 3 years to the month. Actually, I can tell you the date. It's 26 July 2016. Something had been in my mind for a period of time, for a few days. And I finally got my manager to have a discussion with MSNBC, who had set up at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. They were actually at the Constitution Center. And it was beautiful backdrop. You have Independence Hall behind you, the Liberty Bell building behind you. It's incredible. So I had gone to my manager and I said, there is something wrong with this WikiLeaks dump of information that happened last Friday. And this is on a Monday. She said, well, what's wrong with it? I said, this has the feeling of a foreign intelligence operation. And so I gave it some more thought. She went to NBC. NBC thought about it, and then the next day they said, okay, go on and tell, go on with whoever the host is, tell them you need a couple of minutes to have this point that you want to bring up. So it was the first time that I met Joy-Ann Reid. I mean, really been on set with her. She was on there before, and she was holding the fort during the second day of the Democratic National Convention in Independence Hall. And she had never been on camera with me. She had no idea what I was there to say. And so the conversation went like this. So I sat down, got mic'd up, and this thing was in my head. And she said, Malcolm, I hear there's something you'd like to say to us. Because she had no clue. And I said, yes, this WikiLeaks dump, this DNC hacking, the United States is under attack in a deep, broad-ranging information warfare, political warfare attack that is designed to split the Democratic Party in two and elect Donald Trump president. And you could just see the look on her face was like, you're who? Aren't you the terrorism guy? Well, yes, I was the terrorism guy. But as you might know, that my background comes from the intelligence community. Started out as a cryptologist, that's code breaker. I speak foreign languages. But when I started, it was in the early 80s. And it was towards the end, the last decade of the Cold War. But in that last decade, our opponents, the Russians, right? The Soviet Union and their intelligence agency, the KGB, they were everywhere. They were everywhere that I operated. If I was doing Libya, there they were supporting Muammar Gaddafi and Libyan intelligence. If I went to Italy, KGB officers and their surrogates were there. If we went to Malta, they were there. Corsica, any place that you could name, they had assets and resources. So I was always very finely attuned to this foreign intelligence agency. And unlike a lot of other people, I paid attention to the briefings and how they carried out their operations. So decades later, when this particular activity came up, I suddenly realized I had seen all this before. Because why would somebody commit Watergate at the speed of an electron that's hacking into computer programs of the Democratic National Committee? Well, they were conducting Watergate. But why would you do it? Unless, because in my world, the question why is the utmost important question. Right? We can always determine who you are, what you're doing. But why you're doing it is called intelligence. And so I needed to know why. And when one quick glance, it was simple. They were going to throw the election one way or the other. But why would they throw the election? And to whom would be the beneficiary of this election? Well, it became very apparent on the first day of the Democratic National Committee. They were trying to split the Democratic Party in two by making the Bernie Sanders supporters angry, by releasing emails that Debbie Wasserman Schultz preferred Hillary Clinton. You know, these two best friends. Of course she was going to support Hillary Clinton, but to make it seem nefarious. And so information that was relatively dull was taken out and weaponized. And the reason that I had seen this before is because I had done all of my studies back in the era of the Cold War. And I said, this is a very classic Russian intelligence operation. And now they are directly attacking the foundation of American democracy. And the only reason they would do this is if they thought they could get away with it. And only one person would authorize this, the former ex-KGB officer that now runs Russia, Vladimir Putin. But as time progressed, it became very clear this wasn't done just to split Hillary and Bernie. This was done to damage Hillary Clinton and to elect Donald Trump president. Now, all of this has come to pass. And the guys who were in my barber shop in Philadelphia were saying, well, Donald Trump says, what have we got to lose? And Hillary Clinton's evil, and Hillary Clinton's a B word, and Hillary Clinton is this and that. All throughout that campaign, I kept seeing these memes, or what we would call meta-narratives, these little frames around people. And it came out like this: Donald Trump, good, make America great. Hillary Clinton, evil. And the other one was, there's no difference between the two, lesser of the two evils. All of these themes were being pushed, as we would later find out, by a foreign intelligence agency that was also amplifying the exact same message from American citizens. They were carrying out activities like what we would call marionetting, which is where you would, from St. Petersburg, Russia, pretend to be an American citizen, get control of real people in the United States, have them believe you live there, and then organize a protest. And as the ambassador said, a protest often on both sides, right? Pro-Clinton, anti-Trump, on the same street at the same time. This level of manipulation had never happened before in American history. Yes, the KGB, the NKVD, and all of the old Soviet intelligence agencies carried out disinformation operations in the past. As a matter of fact, the old story that the CIA created the AIDS virus and gave it to Haitians and gays was developed by a Russian spy named Ladislav Bittman. And he wrote a whole book about how he had written foreign disinformation, and it would rarely make it into American society. But now, every keystroke that happens on the internet passes around this disinformation. What's happened since that time is our freedom of speech has been turned into a weapon system. A lot of people hear the word weaponized. This is the only context where it has damage and results that can kill you. In my world, we view information, or what we call propaganda products, as information cruise missiles. And we expect when they land to have an effect, a combat result. The Russians, who were the Soviets, they believed the exact same thing. So before I get way out of hand, I want to read you something. Because I got a minute left. This will be very quick. Tucker Carlson attacked me a couple of months ago in his A block because everything that I said to you, everything that I've been saying on television for 3 years, he said I was crazy. And he said, where does he get this stuff? Well, I got it from a guy by the name of Valery Gerasimov, the commander of Russian forces. And he has a doctrine called the Gerasimov Doctrine, where he says the extensive employment of propaganda products enables the situation in a country to be destabilized from within in a matter of days. In this manner, indirect and asymmetric actions and methods of conducting hybrid wars enable the opposing side, that's you, to be deprived of its actual sovereignty without the state's territory being seized. When they hacked our mindset in the 2020 election, 40% of the people in this country no longer believe what we see in our own reality. They have deprived us of our own sovereignty. They technically invaded the country and took over the mindset of 40% of the people. They would rather believe Donald Trump and an ex-KGB officer than any person in this room. Nothing you can show them with your eyes, you know, your lying eyes. What did Donald Trump say? Don't believe it. Only believe what I say. This is the challenge to our democracy. We're in serious trouble, and I hope we can come up with some answers tonight.
All right. Democracy in Peril. Let me just mention we've been joined by another advisory board member of the Institute for Politics, co-chair, Institute for Policy, Politics, and History. Michael Steele is here, the former chair of the RNC. I doubt if he were the current chair, some of the stuff would be happening that is being overlooked. Would you all not agree? So I want to ask a follow-up question of each of you, and the goal is to do that. And I'm sorry we're short on time. I've been a little flexible, though. So we'll say 5 minutes on these responses, and we'll do our best. But we'll see how we do with this. But I'm going to go in reverse order. Malcolm Nance, we know that African Americans were targeted in 2016. Can you talk about how African Americans are being targeted again with disinformation in 2020? And what are the potential outcomes? Now, I've said, not too loudly, but I'll say it in this room, that our democracy is in peril. If we do everything we're supposed to do, everyone in this room knows how important it is for all the, and I can look around the room and pretty much see the constituencies we all represent, which represent the majority of diversity in America. You know, middle class, whites to poor whites, to African Americans, to women, to LGBTQIAs, to Latinx community, organized labor, intellectuals, academicians. I think I've touched about everybody in this room, right? If we do everything we're supposed to do and get everyone in each one of those constituencies I just named out to vote, that still does not necessarily thwart the cheating that's going to go on, you know. And, you know, I've joked maybe some of us need to learn how to cheat too, but if you go play, but we can't. That's not the right, we want to be positive in everything that we do, but if you play cards at somebody's house every night and they got an extra deck you don't know about, you can never win. So, Malcolm, talk about how this is happening again and how the African American community is being targeted about it, and what are the potential consequences if we don't figure out what to do?
I wrote in my second book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, which was an analysis of how Russia and Russian intelligence actually are carrying out these activities all around the world. It's not just the United States. In fact, I think the United States is last we came in last. And over 10 years, from 2010 till now, they have been co-opting the evangelical community in the United States and doing it in a way that they were pitting Christians against Muslims. They were having these conferences every year in Moscow called Protection of Christianity conferences. And Vladimir Putin's largest supporter in the evangelical community is Franklin Graham. He goes there and meets with Putin every year. 10 years they worked on the evangelicals, and they have them lock, stock, and barrel. The alt-right and neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan, some of them, David Duke has an apartment in Moscow. He loans it to Richard Spencer, the head of the Nazis, right? When I did my analysis of the alt-right, without any hesitation, all senior alt-right leaders love the Russians because they see Russia as, in their words, the last bastion of white Christianity to ally America against Islam. And that's, Sam, for those of you who are academics, that's Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And in my, my world, spy world, the only place that I had heard that before was from the lips of Osama bin Laden. That was his big policy, was to have this clash. So disinformation, as it is now injecting itself into Western democracy, has an end goal. And that end goal is to help Donald Trump and the United States transform from constitutional republicanism, a representative democracy, which is, I love this because the tweeters on the internet go, "We're not a democracy, we're a republic." And it's like, moron, a republic is a democracy where the rights of the minority are protected, right? And they never tweet back. So when we do this, they want us to transition from that to a sort of constitutional state by name that is actually an autocracy. And that's what's been going on with Russia, creating these Russian-backed autocracies around the world. So to do that, you have to break certain cogs that make the American machine go. And one of the fundamental cogs that we've learned, certainly in the last 2 election cycles, in the Democratic Party is the Democratic base. And that's African-American men and women and people of college, college education and age, right? Go after them specifically. In 2016, if you read the Mueller report, there were many examples where the Russians were carrying out fake Black Lives Matter Twitter and Facebook accounts and posting in such inflammatory ways that it would be repeated under pro-Trump accounts in order to make the Trump people so angry that they were, of course, even more racially incensed against blacks, right? And then on some other sites that were pro-African American, they would have the Hillary is, what was the thing? Predators, right? The super predators comment, right? They were pushing all of these themes to specifically break the black community in terms of its support, or at least to suppress the vote. Now, I made that comment a few minutes ago about my barbers at my barber shop. The only saving grace, and I cry by even saying this, is I know none of them voted, right? They'll sit there and they'll talk smack all day, but they won't vote. But if they had, possibly 2 out of 4 of them would have voted for Trump. So the targeting of these communities is not by accident. It is by, look, the Soviet Union studied us for a very long time. And when they were pushing anti-black and black themes using teletypes and newspapers, they didn't mean it, but they have this body of academic study which understood the racist heart of some people in the United States, and they turned their intelligence system into a megaphone. And every person who's in this room is a target, no matter what your race, color, creed, or sexual orientation, because they expect to use information in 2020. By the way, they're not using bots anymore, those automated systems. Now it's trolls, real humans behind a keyboard who are now acting as key nodes that get their racist or sexist or whatever program amplified by Americans. So a lot more humans, which means they'll be a lot more adaptive in 2020. So when you detect them, they'll shift and disappear, and they'll go somewhere else. But they are targeting African Americans and Trump voters. And that's what they want to do. They want to megaphone the message this time.
Moving along, Ambassador Fried, two questions, but I think they're important, both to ask at the same time. Help our audience understand, what are some of the signs? How can we recognize what is inauthentic or fake on social media, number one? And number two, and I'm stealing a little bit from some testimony you gave recently, what is social media's responsibility in terms of exposing what's not real and not encouraged? Because they can be very loose with, oh, well, we just want everybody to say whatever they want to say. We don't want to start policing people. But they have a responsibility too. So if you could address that, please.
It's a big burden to ask people to recognize sophisticated fake accounts. That's a lot to ask, especially because the Russians are a lot more sophisticated than they used to be. They are going, bots are so 2016, right? Even trolls are going to become more sophisticated. They're going to set up fake whole sites, publications, organizations, and try to suck people in. We saw a little bit of this in 2016. We will see more of it. But what they really want to do is even one step more sophisticated. They don't want to drown out the domestic sludge, the homegrown bad stuff and racism. They want to blend in with it, steer it, push it along. Now that is very hard to detect, which goes to your second question. What is the responsibility of social media companies? What is the responsibility of Congress in this area? Congress right now, there are a couple of senators who have some sophistication in this area. Warner, Klobuchar are pretty good. Rubio is pretty good on this. They understand the problem. There's one bill that would force disclosure of the actual placers of political and issue advertisements. It's easily done. Ads are identifiable. You can, if there's a group called Americans for Puppies, you want to make sure that it is Americans, and it's not being run out of the St. Petersburg troll farm. The good news is that this can be done. The bad news is that's not where the Russians are. They've moved on. But Congress can also start, and I say this with a lot of reluctance, but we have to start thinking about what is proper regulation of the internet. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about censorship. And the social media companies start screaming, used to start screaming that regulation meant censorship. That's not what it means. But maybe it means forcing people not to disguise themselves. Should there be, and this is a question for public policy, should anonymity online be allowed? Should people be forced, any human being has a right to the internet, but does that human being have a right to disguise him or herself? Can Billy Bob from Oklahoma City, can we insist that he actually be Bob from Oklahoma City? And that is an interesting question, and for public policy. Then we get to social media companies. All right, they went from denial to thinking that, people like Malcolm Nance and myself were old, unreconstructed Cold Warriors, and you're living in a Silicon Valley post-national paradise. You look modern to yourself, and to the Russians, you look like candy. All right, you look like a sucker. Now the social media companies want to be seen as part of the solution, not part of the problem. I cannot tell you, and I haven't figured out in my own mind, whether they want to be seen as part of the solution or they want to be part of the solution, or the question is hard to answer because it depends on who you're talking to. I want to take them at their word and assume that they want to do the right thing and then incentivize them to do it with the threat of regulation standing behind you. Okay, by the way, the Europeans are way ahead of the Americans. Europeans are supposed to be slow, and the European Union is supposed to be bureaucratic and clumsy. They are way, way, way ahead of us. They've got the big social media companies signed on to a code of practice. They're required to give monthly reports to the European Union with the threat of regulation. I think, bottom line is, I think regulation is important. I want to do it step by step, not all at once. The bad news is it's not going to be in place by 2020. It just won't be. I could go on, but time's up.
And we'll get some questions from us. Just real quick, though, point of information, you were naming several states and elections, Macron and other places where they had interfered in elections. You would include Brexit in that too, wouldn't you?
Yeah, they were involved. They
Yeah,
were everywhere.
right. Yeah.
Everywhere. Brexit.
And we see the mess that, that has caused.
Yes, sir.
Virginia case, League of Women Voters, and the ambassador talked about what we as everyday citizens can try to do. And as you said, your organization can't get much more everyday citizen than the League of Women Voters. If you could talk about, you touched on it, but I want to give you the time to actually lay some of those out. Now, you all are involved in a number of cases in court and also working on legislation. Lay some of it out in terms of how you all are dealing with voter suppression in that regard, and if, in fact, the League of Women Voters has started to or is either contemplating or already has a plan in place to deal with this more sophisticated voter suppression of disinformation.
Few questions there, so I'll try to unpack some of that. But as far as legislation is concerned, and I think there are a lot of misconceptions around legislation. For example, HR 1, which is in the House, it was called HR 1, is now the For the People Act in the Senate. There is a comprehensive omnibus package in the Senate right now, which would address a myriad of issues that we're facing in this country around our voting. So, for example, funding our elections infrastructure, which is a huge issue. We know we don't adequately fund our infrastructure. Fighting voter suppression, making sure that same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, so just things that will make it easier. And including election security. It passed in the House. It was because we are living in a hyper-partisan environment. We know this. If you're wearing a blue T-shirt, you must be a Democrat. You're wearing a red one, you got to be a Republican, right? I mean, that's just the environment that we live in. And so it was voted on party lines in the House. It passed. It got to the Senate. There is actually bipartisan support for it in the Senate. The problem is that the Senate Majority Leader has said it's not going for a vote. So they're not even bothering to mark the legislation up. That's what's happening right there. But there are other solutions. The ambassador referenced internet ads. There's something called the Honest Ads Act right now, Senator Klobuchar put forward. And what that would do is regulate ads on the internet, and there's a disclosure portion to that. And so we're really hoping that that will help to mitigate some of the issues. Now let's be real, it's not going to cover everything. I think it's interesting, Malcolm, you might find this, you might know this quote, but I was one of those geeky people who actually read the whole 9/11 Commission report because I was intrigued. I didn't understand why this, how this could have happened. I was younger, I was living in Connecticut at the time, a neighbor of mine had been killed in the World Trade. It just was incomprehensible to me. And one of the things that I got from that always sat with me was it was a failure of imagination on the part of our government. And I truly believe that this most recent attack was a failure of imagination on our government to be able to protect us. It's also currently a failure of urgency on the part of our government. And so that's why something like the Honest Ads Act can help, but again, being able to have things in place in time to actually make a difference is a challenge. And that's why it requires a lot of advocacy work, educating the community, and making sure that people are out there contacting their senators, contacting their representatives. One of the things that is the most effective tool is showing up, flooding their phone lines, sending emails. Snail mail, if that's your thing, go ahead. We're all for that too, although it's not always great for the environment. But we want to make sure that people's voices are being heard because that is the only way that people are going to move. There's also the FEC last year. Again, our own bureaucracy can get in the way of our ability to create change. There was, the FEC has rules around the internet. And so regulation, on the regulation side, they asked for comment. They got tons of comments. We, our organization, put it in. And I just want to say, you know, it's really interesting. There are rules around telegraph and telephone. I repeat, I don't know how, I've never received a telegraph in my life, but there are no regulations currently around the internet and internet advertisement. Think about that. I cannot begin to imagine how this is not possible. And they're getting hung up over one thing. How big should the disclaimer be? How big should it be? So our inability to act is an issue. And the other thing is, when we going back to the Honest Ads Act, which I think is important, you know, a lot of people are doing streaming. A lot of people don't even have cable anymore. They don't have television. And so there's this internet streaming and gaming, you know, as we look at Xbox, PlayStation, places where young people are. These are the types of advertisements that would be subject to this form of regulation or laws. And so it's important that as we're pushing and contacting, I will say, please do push and contact your representatives, because those are some ways that we could at least be out of, you know, the medieval ages and be able to actually have regulation and laws that will help support what we're facing right now. And then there was something else, and I can't forget now. I can't remember now.
Well, I guess
That was it?
lawsuits.
Oh,
Acts,
lawsuits.
yeah.
So we are waiting, we're actually awaiting 2 decisions. Again, like I said, the census decision on the citizenship question, which we are up on that case, and then as well around gerrymandering. And I think, you know, one of the original forms of voter suppression is, as I mentioned earlier, it's gerrymandering in every state. And the census is so important in being able to know who is in your state and being able to have a full, complete count, because that determines not only how much money you get, but also how your congressional districts are, how many congressional representatives you have. Obviously, it doesn't impact the Senate because we all only get 2. But really, being able to have people who are representing us, who are like us, is extraordinarily important. Having an accurate voice, and so those two are very interconnected. And our gerrymandering case has been going on, quite honestly, since I think 2011. So it's been going on for many years, gone through many courts. It actually started as a racial gerrymander, and then they fixed the map, and then it was actually a partisan gerrymander. So it's complicated. But that's what's also really important, is paying attention to some of those suits that are happening, paying attention to how district lines are being drawn. For us, we promote citizen redistricting commissions. We think that it's important for citizens to have a hand in drawing the lines so that we can make sure that they are fair and that we have fair maps across the country. So those are the types of things that I think are really important for everyday citizens to be able to be engaged in, and making sure that your voices are being heard.
Very good. And I have a suggestion too before we go, but on that, and just some ways we can all work together. One more question for Dr. Daniels, and then we're going to get a question or 2 from the floor. Questions only, not statements in the interest of time. I see someone moving toward it now, but anyone who wants to move toward the microphone may want to go ahead and get in line and be ready. A brief question. Gilda Daniels, all the ways of voter suppression that you laid out, you know, and let me just also, just as another point of information, we had the historic H.R. 40 hearing on the Hill last week. How many of you saw that? Sheila Jackson Lee, and that was the Conyers bill finally. The Speaker supports it. No longer a study of why we need reparations, but a study of what form reparations would take. The other difference in this, for those of you who don't mind, it relates to what we're talking about now. It would not only deal with reparations for our enslavement, but all of the vestiges that flowed from slavery. The lynchings, the Jim Crow, the segregation, the redlining, the criminal justice system, and the police violence. So the clock is running on all that. Everything that Gilda laid out would be a study to determine whether or not and could there be compensation to address those things. But having said that, this disinformation is so vast. And we see it every day. Speaking of fake accounts, you all can recognize some of them yourself. You'll be on Facebook with somebody, they have this strange profile picture, you know, and everybody has a cell phone now. Anybody take a picture. but it's not a cell phone picture. So you wonder, it's not a digital photograph. What is that about? We see fake accounts all the time, or even accounts with no picture. You know, always in your inbox, always sending you disinformation. Gilda, on the scale of everything else we've seen, all the different forms of voter suppression, where would you place this disinformation campaign now on the scale? Because it just seems so pervasive, but where would you place it?
It's an interesting question because I think we've always had disinformation. I think many of you probably received an email many years ago around the timing of the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act saying that black people had to get Congress to reauthorize their right to vote. Didn't you ever get that? There was an email that floated around saying that you had to, and so that type of disinformation has always been around, and it's certainly internal and now exponentially external, right? When I was asked to speak on the panel and knew that some of the focus was going to be on the Russian intervention in the elections, I think it's important to note that the Russians didn't change the way votes were cast, right? Because we have this decentralized system where we don't have a central system where all the votes come up to one place and then we say, oh, this is who voted. We have tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of voting machines, and we have voting precincts, and those voting precincts go to on the local level, city level, county level, and then up to the state, depending on it. And so because we have a decentralized system, that's a good thing because it's harder to hack, right? Harder to actually change a vote, right? But it's also can be a bad thing, right? And so with this disinformation, it wasn't that they changed the vote, it's that they were able to change the mindset, right? And able to change how we thought about elections. And with our freedom of speech, it's and everyone believing that they have the right to say whatever they want to say to whomever they want to say, right? That it makes it much harder to regulate that kind of information. So where is disinformation? I place it lower only because I'm more concerned about our access to the ballot box, and that it changed the way people thought about whether or not they were going to vote, who they're going to vote for. But we have so many barriers to actually casting a ballot. I mean, it's easier to get a gun than it is to register to vote. You can register to get a gun in some states in about 24 hours, 36 hours. You register to vote. You have to make sure that you do it at least 30 days before an election. If you do it within less than 30 days, then you can't vote in that election, right? But we process gun licensing much faster than we process voting, and that's primarily because I think you can do more damage with your vote than you can with a gun, apparently, because they're trying to stop you from getting that much more. So on this disinformation, I think the three things we have to do: we have to educate, legislate, litigate. Okay, so if we educate, if we educate our family members, people at our churches, synagogues, mosques, and at the Whole Foods and the Giant, so we have to educate, and we have to energize young people to vote, because they're the missing link, right? They're the ones who are tapping out, saying we don't want to deal with this. So the disinformation is lower on the poll for me than certainly gerrymandering and voter ID and these other pieces of legislation that Chris Kobach and his crew and Alec and these people are put together almost daily, that we're constantly having to combat in court and other places.
Chris Kobach from Kansas.
Yes, sir. Who lost the election for governor.
Chris Kobach from Kansas. Y'all will get that on the way home. Chris Kobach from Kansas. Okay, you got it. All right. Yeah, please, go ahead, quickly, and we gotta go.
I just wanted to correct you on something. With the FBI background InstaCheck, it's 10 minutes to get a gun. It's not 24 hours.
That's well, thank you, Malcolm, for that good news. That's comforting. You're welcome. Needed to hear that. Thank you so much. We got a lot of work to do, folks, don't we? All right, we're going to get quick. We have a long line. One quick question, if you could, and we'll get brief answers. And we recognize this young lady. And I want her to say who she is and what she does. And this is important. You don't mind if I recognize one more woman, do you? You don't mind? You okay with that? Okay. Shireen's expertise is in uncovering and exposing the targeting of young women and girls online. That's what she does, and she's an expert on it, because that is absolutely pervasive, be it electorally and otherwise. Women are harassed online every day. Shireen Mitchell, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I guess my question is around the whole aspect of the disinformation versus the voter suppression, or what I'm calling now digital voter suppression. The impact part is the part that I think is really hard for people to understand. They're trying to grasp the online versus the offline. But if we use the example of what happened in Michigan, 90,000 people did not vote at the top of that ticket. He won by 75K. But if we think about that Russian information that was being pushed that said they were both the same, that's why they didn't vote top of the ticket. They made it to the ballot. So that's just one example about the disinformation I think we need to start thinking a little bit about. But my key question is, how do we get people to think about the ways in which they may have been impacted, that they are now behaving in certain electoral ways that is against their best interest? Well, the two women mostly.
We stand with the women's theme. Okay.
No, Malcolm didn't jump in on the Russian part, but
How do we get people to realize how their thinking is being influenced and impacting the way they vote? I'm paraphrasing, but
Yes.
that's kind of, okay. Either one of you want to?
Yeah, I think that we were just both saying voter. It's
Voter
we
education.
got to start talking now. We should have been talking 2 years ago, right? But certainly starting to talk now, talking to everyone about what happened, what the impact was, what's happening, and how it continues to happen in our communities, and organizing, right, and talking around the dinner table. So I think I think primarily it's education. And I think it's also that I don't think we realize how it has impacted us, in large part. I mean, I have two teenagers. I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. So with this whole thing about fake news, and I mean, it's difficult for adults to realize what's real and what's not. So just teaching them how to tell whether or not this is a verified account or something of that nature. So I think it's certainly education, and it's something that we have to spend a lot more time doing than we have in the past.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's extraordinarily important on the voter education side that we're making sure that we're referring people to credible information and to credible resources and learning how to distinguish them. So, I mentioned I'm committing a sort of a shameless plug, right? But Vote 411, our voter education website, because it's the information in the candidates' names. We are not collecting information, and there are other organizations like the NAACP, like Voto Latino, and other ones who are out there getting the accurate information that people need to make an informed decision. And the other thing I think is important to mention, is just that right now there's like fatigue that has set in. It's like, as an American citizen, sometimes I feel like I've developed ADD, right? It's just, you never know, these things are coming left and right, this thing happened, that thing happened, and it's so hard that people are turning off the news, people are turning information off, and so as we're able to engage, even in those, dinner table conversations, being able to make sure that you have the accurate information, to make sure that you're referring other people to those resources, because a lot of this is going to be mouth-to-mouth not mouth-to-mouth, but people-to-people conversations. I'm sorry, people-to-people conversations that are really going to make the difference, I think, this election. And there is hope. We have more people turn out in 2018 than we did in 2016. And so people are being more careful about the information that they receive. I don't want to make it seem like we're hopeless here. There is a lot of hope around this, I think.
Okay. Why y'all laugh when she said that? Y'all have a naughty crowd. Okay, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name's Bert Ely. I'm a banking consultant here in the Washington area. I want to come back to the Russian threat, which I consider to be very, very serious. What we've heard tonight is a discussion about how to play defensive ball. But why don't we talk about fighting fire with fire? Keeping in mind that apart from its nuclear weapons, Russia is a weak country. Its economy is 1/12 the size of the U.S. economy. It has very serious social and economic problems. They certainly can be hacked. What more should be done, not just by the federal government, and I realize we have a president who's not too keen on taking on Russia, but through other sectors of society to, in effect, go after the Russians in their home, in their country, and through their social media and through their computer networks?
If you really want to make the Putin system hurt, the best thing we found during the Cold War was to promote the best American ideas. Now, we used to do it Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. It's the digital age. But, you know, what does offense look like? I don't think hacking into their systems and cyber war is the way to go. That you want to have that ability as deterrence to keep them from doing it to you. And there is, let's say, there was that leaked article about us already in that space against the Russians. But I think the best way to go after them is to promote democracy and help anti-corruption reforming groups inside Russia. The Russians hate that. I mean, really hate that, which is, to me, a suggestion that it's sort of the right thing to do. That's another discussion, but as a general rule, two rules came out of the Cold War, at least for me. One, don't become them as you fight them. Okay, that's one. And the other is, have faith in our best traditions, not forgetting the worst. But our best traditions helped us win the Cold War. We have to remember that. It would be nice if if the president believed in the best of America, but that's a different story. Anyway, there's much more to say on this, but I want to keep the answer short.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we have to move on. But did you want to say something? You want to respond quick? Oh, yes, please. The other Malcolm responding.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had some pretty sharp beliefs just after the election in 2016. I think I went on air several times and said that we've gotten so ideologically far away from what Russia thinks it is and the way that it's behaving, and we think that it's just a regular state, that it's time to jumpstart the Cold War, but a different Cold War, one in which the ideologies are democracy and our allies in the Atlantic Alliance. We will now identify Russia as essentially communists without the communism, right? That they are a malicious player. When I was at the Washington Post just a few months ago, you know, I said there has to be a penalty, and that this is a question that should come up in foreign policy to anyone who's running for president. How are you going to punish Russia the minute you become president? Because I'm sorry, Russia needs to be punished. You can't come here and take a shot at American democracy and attempt to break all of our alliances, and if we can restabilize our nation, then there should be a penalty. And my penalty would be every Russian oligarch in the world just steal their money. Just take it, you know, just levy $1 billion sanction, you know. Make it hurt, because that's what they want. They stole the money anyway. And use it for reparations.
But sir, if I'm to infer, if you're implying that you actually have some expertise in the area of retaliating and hacking, we'll talk to you after the forum privately, off the record, okay? Don't put him on camera, we'll talk about that offline, man. Everything we can talk about out in the open. Let me do this, though, in the interest of time. We have 6 people in line. I want to get everyone's question, and I'm going to write them all down, and then we'll take each one in order. Is that fine? So let me just hear your question, please, sir. What's your question?
All right. My name is Stan Williams. I'm a retired federal
Yes, sir.
person. My concern is internally. I'm at the point now where if there's an election and Donald Trump loses, I think America is an armed camp. And most of the people that have the weapons are in suburbia and rural area. And I'm not talking about guns, I'm talking about military weapons. If he loses and says the election is false, how will the military respond? And my other part of my question is China.
Okay, got it. Yes, ma'am, your question.
Hello, Dr. Sharon Turpin. I teach here at UDC in the English department, digital humanist and podcaster, and just in general social media. Yes, I've seen you everywhere. So here's my question.
Yes.
As somebody who does do research and publishes on digital humanities, and someone who is a podcaster, and in general hanging out on places like Lipstick Alley, what can we do? Because as far as I'm concerned and what I've seen lately, I think that if you're a black woman and you're online right now, you're a target. And I've witnessed this and I've experienced it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you. Shireen, we forgot to get your website too. .com? Stop Online Violence Against Women. So just so you all have that. Thank you.
And my website is afrofuturismscholar.com.
Thank you. All right.
Gang, gang.
Yes, sir.
My name is Eric Guichard. I'm an investment banker. The questions I have are, number one, we seek regime change in all of these other countries, Iraq, Iran, Sudan, and others, and yet we play seemingly fair game against Russia as if we're playing chess. Why don't we seek regime change in Russia? My banker colleague here mentioned that it is a small country. It's less than 1.7 trillion economy. It's essentially one man, which is Putin, who has about $500 billion in assets, which, as you said, was stolen. We can simply freeze them out of the financial system, as we did Sudan and others, and we can simply regime change them as we do others. Why not Russia in that particular case? Last question, would you consider 2018 midterm election as a success, and does that constitute a blueprint for 2020? Thank you.
All right, got both of those. Man, sound like you and my man want to do something. We'll see both y'all after this is over, okay? Lots going to come out of this. Yes,
My
please.
name is Caroline. I'm a student in political science at UDC, undergraduate. A
All
lot
right.
of us are not here because it's summertime. I left a class early to come. But anyways, my question is for my colleagues that aren't, my fellow college students that aren't here, a lot of us are not 20 out of high school. A lot of us are like 30 or 26 or have admin jobs, have government contracting jobs. When we're looking for our next move, like now we've gotten our bachelor's, like what should we be looking for? Because we're having these conversations in class about, you know, will the black or African American vote sway the next election? You know, like we're studying terrorism. Like what kinds of roles can we go into that's not an internship? Because we're like, a lot of us are kind of past that.
Yeah,
So that's
gotcha.
my question.
Good question. All right, next.
Boy, I'm little. Hi, my name is Sonia Gutierrez, and I am, for the past 47 years, I have been an educator. I'm the founder of a school, and a community active, Latina community activist. And my question is for Virginia. Contrary to the image that the Republicans are giving this country, that we're all a bunch of illegal immigrants, no. The great majority of us, like me, are very proud American citizens. So my question to you is, what are you doing to try to register and then make those Latinos come out and vote? I'll be doing my part working with national organizations, Latino, but what are you doing? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And next question, please.
Hello, I have you all on Facebook Live, so sorry for the camera. My name is Juanita Gray. I am a staff member and doctoral candidate here at the university.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, you all spoke earlier about the responsibility of disinformation with social media. What about the regular media, ABC, CNN? Because a lot of things that they put out there is, well, okay, I'm not even going to talk about Fox because they're not a real news station, but that's propaganda, and that's my opinion.
Okay.
But yes, what's the responsibility of the media with disinformation?
Mainstream media.
Mainstream
yeah,
media,
very good
yes.
question. Very good question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Fatima Floyd, and I'm an educator. I teach English, high school English. And the question I have is, what advice can you give me to give to our young gentlemen that I teach, and also my son, in reference to voting, wanting to vote, because they look at voting as nothing is going to get done.
Okay, very good question. These are outstanding questions. All right, so we'll, you want to start with that, you say? Yeah, let's start with that question. Okay, I'm gonna let you and Gilda answer that. We'll start with that question.
Okay,
What advice for young men who don't want to vote?
I'm going to consider this rapid fire round so that we don't keep you all from your dinners.
Please.
That last question's really good because I run into this all the time. Okay? Voting is all you actually have, if you think about it in this life. Of all of the rights given to you, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all of that, voting is the one thing that you have that's precious. And the fact that they don't want you to vote should tell you how valuable it is, right? I mean, they don't want you to vote, then you should be thinking, I need to really vote because my one vote with the other vote means something. You know, the worst thing, you know, voter suppression that I've seen, the place that has been completely ignored is sports talk television and radio. That's where all these young, that is an information sphere that young men are living in. There's more ESPN channels than there are news channels, right? So this is one of those places where you got to tell them that you think nothing's going to happen, potholes are going to get filled. They get filled in the neighborhoods that vote, right? You want something done? Well, you could get together collectively or shut up.
All right. Gilda, please, yes.
I say to my students and children.
Is the mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry. You mentioned sports, and one of the things that I say to my students and children is, like, for example, tonight they're announcing who's the MVP for the NBA. You didn't get to vote for that. Would you have liked to had a voice in who the MVP of the NBA is? Would you voted for the All-Star team? You know, do you think your vote counted? Well, guess what? There are so many more things that we can impact on a real level, right, by voting for your city councilman, knowing who your city councilman is or your county commissioner, right, knowing who your state legislature is. I mean, I have students who don't even know who their state legislature is, so, or even in some instances, their congressman. So knowing who those people are, how you can get in contact with them, and how you can raise your voice even after you actually pull the lever.
Yeah, good point. And let me just add to that, too. I think one of the surest signs of disinformation and fake accounts are those that are most passionate discouraging people from voting. All right, stopping people from voting. And now it may be a legitimate person who's just been influenced by a fake account, but it starts right there. And especially when you talk to people, say, oh, you shouldn't have that position, and they're immovable and entrenched, I'll never vote, voting is no good. That, to me, is a sure sign to be on the lookout for. All right. What if Trump won't leave? How will the military respond? How will we respond? We might need to take this one offline, too. What do y'all think?
It's real fast. Since I spent my entire life in the military, nothing's going to happen. Okay? The military does not get involved with politics. No one's going to have a coup d'etat and take their tanks and come march on Washington. But as I often say on TV, this is why we fund SWAT teams, okay? Once the election is done, it's done, all right? Anyone that wants to get froggy, I went to SWAT officer school with Capitol Hill Police. I mean, there's a lot of, policemen are a jealous bunch. and they do uphold the law. And anyone that wants to get, wants to play games with democracy, I'm pretty sure the system will not look kindly on them.
All right. What can we do to protect black women? Again, I'm going to refer people to Shireen, Stop Online Violence Against Women. But would anyone else on the panel like to address that question? What can be done to protect black women online? Or do we want to defer to Shireen on that? She's expert. So, Shireen, if you want to give us a couple quick seconds. She's running. Thank you, Shireen. I'm glad you came out tonight, too. What can we do to protect black women online?
Thanks for inviting me out. So there's a couple things. Just be clear that the main targets are black women because black women get out the vote. Just understand that. They have been doing this for quite some time. Russia's pretending to be black women for quite some time. They have targeted black women, tried to shut them down. And so the first thing I say is don't let them silence you. No matter what happens, no matter how they're coming at you, don't stop talking, because that's actually what they want. The other parts of this is I teach people how to sort of protect their data online, because one of the ways they come at you is finding out your personal information and trying to challenge you. So talk to me about that. And then the third is what we try to do is get women to, coalesce with each other, work together. I get women of color from all different cultures working together so that when something is happening and they see something happening, they take action.
And can defend each other. Again, where can people find you real quick?
Stop Online Violence Against Women, STOPOnlineVAW.com.
All right. Thank you. Everybody got that?
Oh, and I'm digital sister everywhere.
You need her to repeat. Anybody
The
need to write that?
original digital sister.
We'll see one more time, because I know people like to write it down. STOP.
STOP, Stop Online, ONLINE, VAW.com.
StopOnlineVAW.com. Everybody got that? And share that with the young women in your lives, too. Very urgent that you do that. Okay. United States seeks regime change in other countries. Why not Russia? Ambassador?
Well, regime change, when we tried it in Iraq, didn't work out so well. So I'm not, I don't want to take responsibility or have this country take responsibility for the regime in Russia. That said, the other part, some other questions were asked. Can you go after Putin's oligarchs and the corrupt Putin kleptocracy? And we already started that. Okay, in my last job in government after 40 years was the sanctions coordinator at the Department of State. And we were going after Putin's cronies after he invaded Ukraine. And at the end of 2016, we were aware of, not as aware as we are now, but we knew what the Russians were doing in our elections, or some of it anyway. And we started going after some of Putin's people who were funding that operation. Now, there are a couple of bills in Congress right now about escalating pressure on the Russians, and some of the best parts of those bills call for a study of Putin's wealth and work on his studies of his kleptocratic networks. This has been done. The American government, I'll just put it that way, can do some of this. What Malcolm Nance was saying was said in a funny way, but it's a real option. I don't want to be responsible for a policy of regime change, but if the best way to get to a better Russia is to show the bad Putin's Russia right now that it will not succeed. And then certain consequences will follow.
Okay.
So this is actually, there's a lot of thought being given to this right now. This administration, I will put it this way, has ambivalent attitudes about it, but there are a lot of people, a lot of professionals, a lot of serious people trying to do the right thing. So watch this space. Those options exist.
All right. For Gilda, would you consider 2018 a good year in terms of, I think the brother was asking in terms of us overcoming voter suppression? the House was flipped, what would you say about 2018?
Well, I don't think we overcame voter suppression, particularly because we had the Georgia was
Stacey, right?
Georgia with the
Florida.
Secretary of State, right? Florida election. So we still had these, too close to call elections because we had voter suppression. Where you had in Georgia, where you had the Secretary of State, who's a candidate for the governor, who was making decisions and impacting whether or not people could actually access the ballot. I mean, we have these politically motivated people who are in very important positions, and until we can make these positions, particularly Secretary of State, we had it again in 2000, right, where you had Catherine Harris was the chair of the elect George Bush campaign and was making decisions about what votes would actually be counted, right? And then we fast forward many years later, and we're still doing the same thing. So until we can make these chief election officials nonpartisan, and maybe they shouldn't, I don't know whether or not they should be in an elected position or not, because we have to change who gets to make the decisions. When I was at Grambling State University in Louisiana, I had a professor who said, we play the game, they make the rules, we win the game, they change the rules. Right, and so we got to start. And Hamilton says you got to be in the room when it happens. So we got to start being in the room when it happens. We got to start being able to change. We're playing by the rules, but also being able to make those rules as well.
Did Professor Daniels just name drop another HBCU and our HBCU? Is that what she did? That's all right. From a student here at our HBCU, what should we be looking to do when we graduate? Tired of internships, right? I think you should be looking at the House and the Senate and the White House. Y'all need to get ready to run. One way I would answer that, too, is in this institute, and I'm going to put the mayor on the spot a little bit, and Amy. See, I think one of the things that ought to happen, this is a young woman who grew up in this city and then held the highest office in this city. Here's another one who was on the city council. Michael's still not in the city per se. He grew up here, but in Maryland politics. I think these young people would be blessed by having you during the school year. Sit down and doing brief seminars with them about how you got where you were. What were you doing when you were their age? What were you thinking? What was moving you in that direction? Because a lot of times it's just really about navigating life, right? So that's one suggestion I would make. And I think that now that they're here on this campus, that would be good for you all. But anybody else want to? And what's some of the other things that you would say to these young people they ought to be looking for?
You can also, there are fellowships. You can create a job like with Equal Justice Works. You can create your own job. There are a number of fellowships where you can apply to actually work at organizations like Advancement Project and other organizations like NAACP, LDF, and others. So there are a lot of social justice organizations that have money and want young people who are energized to come and work with them. So look in those areas as well.
Okay. And did you want to respond to that?
Oh, I was just going to say, don't, the nonprofit sector, like DC is your oyster. So there are plenty of entry-level jobs. I started my job community organizing, and now I'm the CEO of one of the most powerful voting rights organizations in the country. And so, there is a trajectory and a path. You just need to figure out what you're passionate about, and don't downgrade, don't think that going in as a receptionist is a downgrade. There are plenty of opportunities. Also within government, and don't downgrade and think that all of a sudden, or don't diminish what an internship can do for you. Opportunities on the Hill, opportunities to network and meet different people. There is just, like I said, DC is your oyster, so it's really finding out what you're interested in and then searching for those organizations that are working in those spaces.
All right. The next question is directed at you, Virginia. The Latino community, we focus a lot on the African American community, but there's a lot of disinformation targeting the Latinx community as well, and confusion and divisiveness. What's the League of Women Voters doing to defend the Latinx vote and register and prevent voter suppression in that community?
Silvia, ¿vale? Silvia, su nombre. Sonia. Entonces, buena pregunta. My mother is, I was raised by a very proud Puerto Rican woman, and so this is something There you go, Boricua.
All right.
Okay, so we're right here. So it's something that's very important to me in particular, because my first voting experience, my mom is a brown woman. I don't look like her. So when she took me to vote for the first time, I had no problems. She, who had voted many times, was asked for proof of residence. So that was one of my first lessons in navigating life and seeing that I was looked at and treated differently. And so this is something that's important to me. Before I came to the League, I fought in the Latino and immigrant rights movement for many, many, many years, for over a decade. So obviously this is something I bring to my role that I'm very passionate about. But the League is actually doing a lot to register voters. I keep mentioning vote411.org. I really am not trying to make these shameless plugs, but we're actually going through an overhaul right now and looking at how we can make that a multilingual site for voter information. We are also at one of the only organizations that can access naturalization ceremonies around the country. So when newly naturalized citizens are finally sworn in as an American citizen, we are right there afterwards to register them to vote at all of the courthouses. We are also working with partners like Voto Latino, Naleo, and others to make sure that we are in spaces where the League might not have a full presence, that we're making sure that we're partnering with those organizations to make sure that we're getting the correct information out. We're also working with NIC, the National Immigrant Integration Coalition. They have a presence. And then FIRM. We all know that there's a huge crisis right now at the border. So I want to give a plug for the Fair Immigration Reform Movement. Those partner organizations like Chirla and Casa de Merida and others, we're working with them as well to register voters throughout the country. So again, looking at community partners, how are we partnering in those places where we don't have access, making sure that we have linguistic proficiency to make sure that people can find the information that they need, and then again through naturalization ceremonies.
All right. And our last question for the evening, very good question as well. What about mainstream media? We talked about social media. Now he's good at projection. Everybody else, fake news is what he calls everything else. But that's actually what's true. It's the opposite. He said Hillary Clinton was a crook, go to jail, and we know who was really committing the crimes. So what about mainstream media, Ambassador? You talked about transparency and social. What responsibility does mainstream media have in terms of what they'll do? Because let's be honest, I live in New York now. The New York Times was relentless on the Democratic nominees' alleged criminality. Every single day, and that had an influence. We don't know whether they were influenced by Russia, probably not, but that's the power of suggestion. Criminal. You pick up New York Times, read that every day, it has an impact. That's mainstream media. They wouldn't let it go. And then everybody was like embarrassed when they realized it wasn't true. But what responsibility does mainstream media, would you say, have, Ambassador?
Oh man, there are so many ways to really mess up a question like that. I think mainstream media has a responsibility to do its job, which is not just fall for clickbait, for sensationalism and cheap reporting, by which I mean responding to the president's tweets instead of digging deeper. And it's easy to respond to the tweets, and investigative journalism is expensive. And the business model is a real problem. But, the truth shall set you free, right? And they're digging deeper and then exposing some of the things we've been talking about this evening is important. I think a lot of Americans, including a lot of Trump voters, want to do the right thing. And it's a responsibility of the media to let them know what the score is. And that's, more easily said than done. People live in their own bubbles. But rather than just indulging in this cable channel's truth or that cable channel's truth, break free of it, and I think people will listen. That may be naive of me, but I think people can be better than they often seem. I don't know that that helps, but I've been thinking about this, and I don't have a simple answer.
Thank you, Ambassador. This has been an incredible panel, wouldn't you say? And very informative. But let's also, not only for the video, but for all of you, let's just do a quick roll call, beginning with Professor Daniels. Website, social media handles where people can find you, keep up. You got a book coming out soon, too. Can't wait. All right, she came prepared, too.
Okay.
Uncounted.
Website, www.gildadaniels.com. Twitter is Gilda_Daniels. And the book, Uncounted, The Crisis of Voter Suppression in the United States, with NYU Press, comes out in January 2020, just in time.
Beautiful. Okay. Virginia?
Yes, website, www.lwv.org. And then we also have www.vote411.org. So voter information and information about all of the other great stuff we're doing. You can also find us at LWV on both the Twitter and on Facebook. You can find League of Women Voters. And then personally, I'm Case, K-A-S-E, Virginia, on Twitter. And Virginia Case, you can find me on Facebook as well. So pretty easy to find around these parts.
Okay. Y'all not on Instagram?
Yes, we are. You can find us, League of Women Voters, on Instagram as well.
Gilda, you on Instagram?
I need a social media person to kind of help me figure out.
We don't reach
all
these
this
young people. That's
stuff.
where all the millennials are. All the millennials like me on Instagram. That's where all us millennials are. Okay, Ambassador.
Daniel Freed, I'm now with the Atlantic Council since I retired from government. Since we're doing plugs, Democratic Defense Against Disinformation 2.0, wrote that with my colleague, Alina Polyakova, gets into some of these issues. And go on the Atlantic Council website. The Russian propaganda TV station RT called us the most Russophobic organization in Washington.
Wow.
So, you know, that's
a compliment.
okay.
That's a compliment for you, isn't it?
I took it that way. And I must say I am honored to be on this panel.
We're honored to have you, sir. And folks, just Twitter, because they do tweet about him a lot, at Atlantic Council. So you can follow him on Twitter, too, as well as the website. And lastly, but not least, the hardest working man
I don't know about that.
in cybersecurity and attack and disinformation.
So you can find me on Twitter at Malcolm Nance. That's MALCOLMNANCE. That's where I do most of my social media activity. I try to limit my exposure to those other platforms. What else?
Where's your mic?
Oh, you need my mic? You need that?
Yeah, it helps.
I don't need any mic. Okay, so at Malcolm Nance on Twitter, where you'll see most of my activities, or in the great big media on MSNBC. And what else did you need? That's it? All right.
You on Instagram?
No, I'm not on Instagram. I do have an Instagram account there. That's also at Malcolm Nance, but I rarely put anything up.
But that is your account. It's not a fake
it's my
account.
account.
It is your actual account. Okay.
It's all verified. Verified accounts out there. As far as media goes, there are several books. I wrote the first book about the Russian hacking about 8 weeks before the election, called The Plot to Hack America. Everything in it came true.
That's right.
And then the second book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, which is a very good book if you want to know how and why the Russians went after not just the United States, but the rest of the world. And this fall will come out the last of that plot series, The Plot to Betray America, which is about how Team Trump compromised national security.
All right. Isn't this a fine panel? Give them all a round of applause. And very, very informative. Isn't that right? So we'll post the video. Please share it everywhere. We thank all of you for being here. Let's welcome back to the microphone Mayor Sharon Pratt, please. The chair of our Institute for Politics, Policy, and History. Give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Mark. Did Mark do a great job? I also want to underscore, this has been wonderfully insightful. You are really a powerful thought leaders who have really educated us, stimulated us, inspired us. So thank you very, very much. I do want to make a quick announcement. We have another event a little different type, July 11th, from 5 to 6:30. We deal with a speaker series, but as you know, we're also about rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C. So we have resident fellows, one of whom is here, Rolamin Kwanda, who will talk to us about, he's going to curate how his family, their travels as slaves at Mount Vernon to Brookland, Washington, D.C. Wow. So that's one of our resident fellows. Another resident fellow is the one who's going to have the event on the 11th of July. I had to leave. Her name is Rona Friedman in the area of arts and culture. That event will take place at the Textile Museum at George Washington University from 5 to 6:30, and she will, with her panelists, explore some of the significant buildings of this city. We are a very unique city. They talked about the room where it happened. That's where we happened. Washington, D.C. came out of that meeting with Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson, and we have such a wonderfully unique history, and our buildings are reflective of that history. And she has a panel that will be led by the Washington Post critic for art, what is it, arts and culture, thank you, help me out, Philip Kennicott, and he is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it is quite an extraordinary group, so you will enjoy that panel. So please be a part of that. Thank you for being here. We're as good as our audience, and we're happy to have an awfully lot of smart people in this audience. So thank you all so very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.